Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to another episode of Hangout, where we basically hang out. And today we have a very special guest, one of the instructors here at the Ilm Summit in the UK, inshallah. And he's actually a Canadian, although he's left us. He's made hijrah down, very down south, very, very down, to the bottom of the earth, actually. To Australia, but Sheikh Yahya Ibrahim is with us today. Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
How's everything?
Wallahi alhamdulillah, ana fi ni'ma, Allah yabarak fi.
Alhamdulillah. How are you finding the summit so far?
Alhamdulillah, wonderful people, wonderful environment. I pray inshallah that Allah puts benefit in it for us all.
Ameen ya Rab. Sheikh, we miss you in Canada.
Allah yabarak fiik. You know, I'll be there in a couple of weeks in January inshallah, 2015, but Allah make it easy ya Rab.
Ameen ya Rab. Actually, I visited Australia, and you know, Canada and Australia are quite similar. And I think the context of the young Muslims there is also quite similar, the dilemmas that a lot of us face. One thing that people kind of ask, though, is that, is it possible for us as Muslims living in Australia, living in Canada, living in the US, living in the West in general, is it possible for us to actually follow the sunnah in this day and age? You know, a lot of kids will wonder, I gave the example to Sheikh earlier that I started wearing pants recently. Okay, I know it's like a big, mashallah, big announcement, right? But I started wearing a lot of pants and you know, dress-up shirts, and people would come to me and be like, brother, you know, like, is this you know, correct? Is this something you should be doing? Is this from the sunnah? And I kept thinking, like, what sunnah are you referring to, right? People have this idea that the sunnah only exists in Saudi or Medina, or it you know, emulates a certain people. But can you shed some light on that? Like, what does it mean? I know you have your tweets, mashallah, I love them, you know, keeping on the sunnah, hashtag on the sunnah. Give us some examples, ideas. What does it mean to actually be upon the sunnah?
The sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ is his way of life, whatever he would recommend for us and what he would shun. And the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ isn't exemplified, you know, by a particular attire. So, for example, I'm wearing a dishdasha or a galabiya. I'm dressed like an Arab, which is because I'm Arabic. But there's nothing wrong with wearing a suit and pants.
Right.
Which is equally acceptable. And I think people need to, you know, to get out of that naive perspective that the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ is related to like Saudi culture or Arabic culture or, you know, these particular kinds of things. The Prophet ﷺ dressed the way the people in his time dressed. He ate the food that the people of his city ate. And when food that was presented to him was something that he didn't fancy and wasn't familiar with, didn't grow up eating, he didn't say it's haram, he just didn't eat from it. And the Sahaba, they looked at it and they said, Ya Rasulullah, you're not eating from this, sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Is it forbidden for us? He said, no, it's just something my people don't know. And I think this concept of culture is very important. You know, there's this amazing hadith of Umar radiallahu anhu. He's the narrator of this hadith, it's in Bukhari, where he said, you know, when we used to live in Mecca before the hijrah, the men of our city, the Meccan, the Muhajirin, we used to rule over our women. You know, if I said to my wife, do something, she would generally do it. There wasn't a lot of discussion. But the women of the Ansar, they used to rule their men. Right? They used to rule over their men.
Right.
فَلَمَّا هَاجَرْنَا, when we made the hijrah, our women, تَعَلَّمْنَا مِنَ الْأَنصَارِ, our women began to learn the culture of the women of the Ansar. So one day I said to my wife, you know, this, فَرَاجَعَتْنِي. She responded back to me. He said, what? غضبت, I got angry. You know, how can this be? This is, you know, I've never experienced this before.
Right.
And I got so angry, it was the middle of the night, and went out. I'm going to my daughter's house, Hafsa, the wife of the Prophet, to speak to the Prophet of Allah ﷺ about this. You know, what's happening? These women have gone crazy. Now for him, from his cultural perspective, not religious perspective, it was a cultural manifestation. It wasn't Islam, right? So the Islam of the women of the Ansar and the Islam of the women of the Muhajirin was equal, but they just had a different way of dealing with their husbands. So he came to the Prophet, and he was going to knock on the door of the Prophet, but he said, I listened from outside, and I could hear his wife responding back to him.
La ilaha illallah.
He said, so I went home, I didn't go home, I went to the masjid, I was so upset I didn't go home, I slept in the masjid out of fear, you know, I had to see the Prophet as soon as he got out. And so that gives you this perspective of culture, that culture influences our manifestation and practice of faith. So personally, I think, you know, that people would look upon you strange because you were wearing a pair of jeans or pants that meet the requirements of, you know, they're not skin tight, you're not You weren't wearing those sprayed-on pants, were you?
No, they didn't fit. I tried.
Okay, so if it's something like that, I can see the awkward looks. But if you're wearing, something appropriate, alhamdulillah, there's nothing wrong with that. So I think, we have to mature a little bit in our understanding of what is the sunnah. The sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ are the things that come as a totality of his life. People mistake the, hadith as being sunnah. And, it's not just one isolated statement of the Prophet ﷺ that builds a sunnah. It's how a collection of his statements come together to build the foundation of the modality and habit of the Prophet. So your question, can you be on the sunnah in Australia, and can you practice the sunnah in Australia or Canada or Malaysia or wherever you live? The answer, of course, is absolutely yes. It can have a different manifestation according to the color. You can be on the sunnah and dressed in black as a sister in Saudi Arabia, but still be equally on the sunnah and dressed in a slightly colored hijab in Australia. There's no ambiguity and difference and distinction between that.
Right. Here's a theory, or I guess a scenario for you, theoretical scenario. Okay. No. Imagine the Prophet ﷺ was alive today.
Salatu wassalam.
Okay. And he was living in the West. What would he wear?
Look, Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah, he discusses this, for example.
Okay.
Right? And Shaykh al-Uthaymeen, rahmatullahi alayhi, the Imam al-Uthaymeen, he would write to the students, the Saudi students, and he would say, dress the way the people are dressed. So when you're in America, it's not your requirement. Those who were going to study there, he would say to them, don't wear your white abaya and ghutra and iqal. Sometimes you find it strange. You walk into a place and you see a person, it's like minus 30 degrees, right? And the brother's wearing, sandals, and you're like,
what's going on? Yeah.
And the wind is going up his thing. And you're like, what's wrong with this brother?
Yeah.
What's wrong with wearing a pair of boots, a pair of socks, a pair of pants that meets the requirements of the deen?
Right.
And that's the aim. And our religion is a religion of simplicity. It's not one of ostentation. In fact, it is sinful for a person to wear the bisht, for example, a Saudi cloak, just so that he can be hallmarked as being more pious or more learned and religious than he would be if he wasn't wearing it. So I think that's something to consider.
But would it be safe to say then, if the Prophet ﷺ was alive today, he would wear the clothes, and the clothes of the
people, yeah.
He would wear a suit. He would wear.
I don't know if he would wear a suit,
okay.
But I'm just saying the Prophet ﷺ was not of the type to contradict the permissible things in culture. So if it was something that was a permissible action, the Prophet ﷺ would not go out of his way to contradict it in that sense.
A lot of our communities, they kind of have this. Maybe they have a cultural interpretation of Islam that they took with them from back home, and they come to the West and they kind of enforce that on people. Like, brothers take shahada in the masjid, like, all right, first thing you need to do is start wearing shawar khamis, or start, dressing like this, or acting like that, or eating this type of food. Biryani all of a sudden became the hallmark of Islam. How do we also balance cultural interpretation with cultural enforcement on people, and understanding the balance between that and the actual sunnah?
I think the problem is we're too judgmental, Yahya. Brother wants to wear pants, let the brother wear pants.
That's what I'm saying. That's all I wanted to do.
Right? Brother wants to eat, anjera, let the brother eat anjera. He wants to eat.
Amen to that, Sheikh. Amen to that.
The brother doesn't want the biryani, khalas. What you eat, what you wear, as long as it meets the confines of the sharia, is the essence of our worship. It is wrong for a person to assume that if other people don't have, a similar cultural slant as him, that they're not really, a part of the community. It's wrong that we put people on the border just because they don't kind of fit the cultural ideals. And I think a lot of it also comes from mistranslations. Like I remember one day, Riyadh al-Salihin, for example, it's the book of hadith, Imam Nawawi's collection. Right. And, one of the earliest translations of it, I remember I was standing in a masjid once, 10, 15, 20 years ago, and I was looking through, and I'm going to open it, the hadith, I read in English, it said, the Prophet ﷺ used to love curry. And I thought, curry? What's
Which
this curry
was
about,
that?
Curry, really? The Prophet loved that spicy, hot curry? All right. I said, I got to look at the Arabic of this hadith, right? So I turn over the page and I read the Arabic and I said, كان النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم يحب المرق, which means the stew or the broth that meat was cooked in.
Oh, what? Yeah.
But for an Indo-Pakistani translator, it could only be...
It could only mean one thing.
Curry. So you could imagine someone picking that and saying, wow, the Prophet of Islam loved curry. Well, you got to love curry.
Allahu Akbar.
That's not the reality, right? And those kind of things have crept into faith where we've forgotten that there are sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ that are intentional for us to follow him in its conduct. So the sunnah of how we prayed, we follow him. The how we made hajj, we follow him. But there were sunnah of ada, sunnah of just personal circumstances. The kind of color he wore, or what his favorite garment was. It doesn't mean it is an act of ta'abbud for us. So you didn't hear, for example, that the Sahaba would wear that particular thing just because they had seen the Prophet ﷺ wear that color or wear, and so on. It wasn't the way the Sahaba understood the tradition and the Sunnah.
But on the discussion of, on the condition of clothing, a lot of times I think for sisters specifically there is a little bit of confusion. People feel like wearing all black or wearing a certain style of abaya or dressing a certain way has more religious connotation than, for instance, a colorful hijab, or some sisters will wear like dresses and try and cover themselves, I guess, as best they can, but it's not like an abaya or a typical thing you would see in Saudi or these places. Can you maybe explain a little bit of what exactly is considered sunnah for sisters? Because obviously, as the Prophet ﷺ was a man, it's easier for us to emulate his sunnah per se. What do sisters do in that circumstance?
Look, when it comes to clothing, there are particular requirements for hijab. Once those requirements are met, the hijab is valid irrespective of the shape or color or design or style or outlook. And the 7 requirements are really simple. That it's opaque, it's not see-through. That it's not heavily perfumed, that you can smell a sweet scent. That it is not shape-fitting, hugging or skin-tight or something of that nature. That it is not a dress of shuhra, it's not ostentatious. She's not wearing a black scarf with a Chanel symbol just so that people know that's a $500 scarf. This is my bling bling scarf, right?
Here you go.
So it could be you're dressed head to toe in black, but you've dressed with a particular fabric and in a particular way just so that you can throw it in other people's face. It limits your hijab, right? That the hijab is something it's... not libas shuhra, ostentatious. It's something that is not worn to distinguish yourself from other people. So all of those are things that come together to make this framework of hijab. Now, if, for example, she dresses in black, alhamdulillah, it's black. If she does it because the place she's visiting, it's an expectation, she should model herself to it. So if you're going, for example, to Kuwait, where all of the women are wearing a black abaya, then you should conform to that. You shouldn't be in the hot pink Nigerian color, right? You know what I mean?
There's anything wrong with the Nigerian.
Yeah. So in your cultural context, it's acceptable and valid, but when you put it there, you stand out.
Right.
So it actually brings much more attention than if you did not have it on. So that's something to consider as well. So I think it's breaking it down to what are the essentials and what are things that are preferred. The nature of attire is that it is something khudhu zinatakum. It's a form of beauty. And a man once heard the Prophet ﷺ, the hadith is a Muslim. The Prophet said, a person who has an atom's weight of arrogance in their heart shall not enter paradise. And the man stood up having misunderstood the hadith. And he stood up and he said, Ya Rasulullah, inna rajul, a person, an individual, yuhibbu an takuna thiyabuhu hasana. She wishes to wear fine tailored clothing. وَمَأْكَلَهُ, his food wants it to be, fine dining. And his mode of transport is, I want to have something nice. If I can afford that, and I'm not doing it out of, to throw it in other people's face, is that bad? The Prophet said, Allahu jamilun yuhibbul jamal. Allah loves beauty. He is the source of all beauty. وَيُحِبُّ أَنْ يَرَى أَثَرَ نِعْمَتَهُ عَلَى عِبَادِهِ. And He loves to see His servants enjoy the blessings He's given them. Al-kibr, the arrogance I'm warning you of, بَطَرُ الْحَقِّ وَغَمْدُ النَّاسِ. It's to look down upon people, and it's to reject truth when it's arrived to you on account of who said it to you. He doesn't know enough, and that kind of thing. So I think that those are key issues.
Okay, so getting back to the idea of being on the sunnah, obviously, the sunnah is more than just clothing. The sunnah is more than just eating.
No.
I think the sunnah, for a lot of people, they neglect also the personal manners and etiquettes that they would deal with people day to day with.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about, how do we uphold those prophetic mannerisms, even as Muslims in the West?
Yeah, so the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ can be typified with his attitude and behavior. So when you ask his wife, Aisha radiallahu anha, describe the Prophet to us, what is he? She said, كَانَ الْقُرْآنُ يَمْشِي بَيْنَ النَّاسِ. He was a Qur'an that walked amongst people. So he lived the life that embodied the Word of God. And that included what his heart felt towards others, what his tongue, what his ears, what his eyes would say in consequence of what's in his heart. And I think those are the natural elements of the Sunnah. The Prophet ﷺ, you can use just moments in his life that kind of give you who he was. One famous incident, there was a time where the Prophet needed to borrow money. The Prophet, they lived in a time of austerity and poverty. And although his son-in-law, for example, was a wealthy man, Uthman radiallahu anhu, super wealthy by even today's standards, the Prophet didn't ask him for a loan. And that kind of teaches you that sunnah of, if I ask my son-in-law, he might say, Ya Rasulullah, you're the Prophet, don't give back. Right? So the Prophet actually borrowed money from a Jew, a businessman. And this Jewish individual, he came to the Prophet a month before the term of repayment. And as the Prophet is speaking on Friday in front of his community, in his masjid, in front of his Sahaba, that man comes in and begins to abuse the Prophet ﷺ.
In the middle of
in the prayer, right? And he says, what kind of man are you? Give me back my money. Addi daynak, give me your money. What kind of person? Wasdada jahlu. His ignorance increased about the Prophet ﷺ. Umar ibn al-Khattab stood up and grabbed this man. He's going to tear him up.
That's it.
And the Prophet said, Da'hu ya Umar, sit back down, let him be, continue. The man continued to abuse wasdada jahala. His ignorance increased and his voice was louder. And when the man had finished, the Prophet says to Umar, the same man who had come up to defend him, but in the wrong way, he says to Umar, take this man and borrow more money from another person. Enough money that you repay him my loan, although it's not time for repayment, repay him my loan and ask for a similar amount over it and give it to him as a gift on account of your mistreatment to him in our masjid. Now, Umar radiallahu anhu, was upset, angry with this man. And as they're walking, the man says to Umar, do you know why I did this? Umar said, لِأَنَّكَ عَدُوُّ اللَّهِ وَرَسُولُهُ. Because you're an enemy of God. You're just
jerk,
an evil man, right? You're an enemy of God and His Messenger. And he said, no, that's not the reason. In our scripture, I've seen every characteristic of prophethood in Muhammad ﷺ, except for one. And the only way I could bring it out was to test him by it. And Umar now was intrigued, what is this characteristic? And he said that whenever the ignorant accost him, it only increases him in compassion towards them. So when he told you to repay my debt, I said he's not a prophet. But when he told you to give me a gift equal in its amount, I know he is the Prophet of God. And he came to faith. That's the sunnah of the Messenger ﷺ. That compassion, that resilience, that patience, that endurance, that wisdom. That's what you talk about when you talk about the sunnah ﷺ.
Stories like that always make me reflect, and I think to myself, is that something that I could actually do, control myself in that fit of rage? Like, it would be extremely hard for me.
It was difficult for the Sahaba, and that's why these lessons were important. And it was difficult for the Prophet, and that's why he was taught the lessons of those who came before him. So he was taught about Noah, he was taught about Yusuf, he was imprisoned unjustly. He was taught about, hatred of family and jealousy toward, So he was taught through the life experiences of the noble ones who preceded him in that path of prophethood. And therefore the Prophet became, as one individual, he collected all of those characteristics of prophethood embodied in him. And that's why the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ is an indispensable habit of life that we seek to emulate in the best capacity that we can.
But is it actually possible for someone in this day and age, living in the West, Australia, Canada, US, whatever, to follow the sunnah, to actually attain those characteristics and implement them on a day-to-day basis? I mean, through work, through school, through all facets of life.
The aim is for us to actualize as much of it, but the Prophet makes it easy for us. He tells us, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when I order you to stay away from something, don't come near it. And when I've recommended for you good things, do as much of it as you can. And therefore, as much of the refined, blessed characteristics of the Prophet that we can embody in ourselves, we should try to collect as many of them as we can. And our aim is to collect the ones that are rooted in the heart before the physical, which is usually the opposite. Usually it's much easier for us to say, Bismillah, mashallah, inshallah, than it is for actually to have genuineness and genuine compassion in our heart that then shows in our actions, right? And that's the aim.
Jazakallah khair, Shaykh. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to stay upon the sunnah.
Ameen, ya Rabb.
And barakallah feek for joining us on this great episode. Make sure all of you stay tuned for next episode when we take other great leaders, preachers, and teachers and just hang out with them and learn so much in these short moments of time. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless all of you and allow us to stay upon the sunnah. Inshallah, I'll see you next time. Jazakallah khair. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.